Being a superhero is often a thankless job. There are long hours, the constant looming threat of death, and we don't want to even think about the high insurance rates. But our favorite Marvel heroes have no shortage of allies they can rely on during times of trouble. Unless, of course, they're the ones fighting. Today, we're going to talk about some of the best times our heroes went head-to-head against one another. How can we not kick things off with the infamous airport fight from Captain America Civil War? This is one of the biggest battles in the history of the MCU, and it's the perfect blend of exciting action and humorous quips. On one side, you have Tony Stark, who's plagued with guilt and in favor of the Sokovia Accords. On his side is his best friend Rhodey, Black Widow, Black Panther, Vision, and of course, Underoos. You know, Spider-Man. Then we have Steve Rogers protecting personal freedoms and his best friend Bucky Barnes. He's joined by Hawkeye, Falcon, Scarlet Witch, and his biggest fan, AntMan. Interestingly enough, AntMan almost fought alongside Iron Man since he was trying to stay on the right side of the law and all. But Marvel Studios switched things up at the last minute and decided to give AntMan a serious case of hero worship, and this was definitely a fight for the ages. Peter Parker grabbed Captain America's shield right out of his hands. Friend fought against friend, and Scott Lang got really big. Sadly, him showing up in the battle at all caused a rift to grow between him and Hope Van Dyne, but don't worry, they managed to patch things up. We all know how badly Steve Rogers wanted to be a soldier back before turning into a superhero, so maybe it's not entirely surprising how much he seems to love to fight. In fact, you'll notice that he makes more than a couple of appearances on our list because of his penchant for battle. This is a character who's the peak of human perfection, has access to a vibranium weapon, and is strong and worthy enough to wield Mjolnir. Needless to say, he's an exceptionally strong opponent, but one of his greatest challenges was the time he faced the ultimate foe, himself. In Avengers Endgame, we saw our heroes travel back through time to the iconic Battle of New York in order to find the Infinity Stones. Steve Rogers was after the Mind Stone, but he ran into a little problem, namely himself. Well, his past self, if you want to be technical. He learned the hard way how annoying it is to be on the receiving end of an "I can do this all day," and we got to watch the showdown of Captain America versus Captain America. But don't worry, fans, Captain America ended up winning. He took some time to savor the victory, and by savor the victory, we mean staring at his own butt before heading back to his own time. Everyone knows that Bucky Barnes and Steve Rogers are the very best of friends, and they have been for practically their entire lives. But even the best of friends fight from time to time, especially if one of them is brainwashed by an evil organization like Hydra. That was exactly the very specific case these two pals found themselves in during the movie Captain America: The Winter Soldier. At first, Bucky didn't even recognize his own name when he ran into Steve on the street. Of course, nobody wants to hear that they willingly went by the name Bucky, so we don't blame him for fighting with Steve at this point. But that fight was just the warm-up for the Grand Friend Showdown finale. Steve saves Bucky from a pile of debris, and Bucky pays back his kindness by kicking the snot out of him. Because Steve refuses to fight against his friend, it's a one-sided battle that's pretty hard to watch, but there's nothing like pummeling someone to jog the old memory. Because eventually, Bucky remembers Steve, and even saves his life by pulling him out of a river. These two friends would still have an uphill climb, but at least they stopped trying to destroy one another. Getting Bucky Barnes and Steve Rogers on one side was only half the battle. While the two old friends patched things up in Captain America: The Winter Soldier, there was still a lot going on by the time Civil War rolled around. Bucky was on the run from the government due to his past as the Winter Soldier, and things were only going to get worse. He was framed for a serious explosion, which resulted in quite a few deaths. Most notably among them was T'Chaka, the former Black Panther and father of T'Challa. Pretty much everyone in the world was against Bucky, except for his friend Steve. But things got quite awkward when Steve's new friend Tony Stark showed up. Not because of the friendship thing, but because of the whole Bucky killed his parents thing. Yeah, we don't think Emily Post has a protocol for that kind of thing. Tony was furious, both because of his loss and because Steve knew and didn't tell him. The three men engaged in a bitter battle that left nobody unscathed. In the end, Steve walked away, but Tony forced him to leave the shield his father had crafted behind. Not only was Thor Ragnarok a great movie, but it got off to a strong start. If this was a video about the greatest battles in the MCU, we'd definitely talk about Thor facing off against the massive fire monster Surtur. But since we wouldn't really consider him a hero, let's move on. After Hela shows up and crushes Mjolnir, Thor ends up on Sakaar in the custody of the Grandmaster. He's put up against the Grandmaster's champion, who just so happens to be his good friend, the Incredible Hulk. Unfortunately for Thor, Hulk is probably the only Avenger who likes fighting more than he does, and it's clear that he's not going to pull any punches. At first, Thor seems to be at quite the disadvantage since his hammer was crushed. It's not as big of a deal for the Hulk, who's no stranger to fighting with just his big old green fists. Eventually, Thor actually uses his godlike powers, and the result is nothing short of spectacular, but we may never really know who won. While it looked for sure like Thor was going to emerge triumphantly, the Grandmaster interfered so Hulk would win. Now we'll never be able to stop theorizing about what would have happened if these two were allowed to finish their fight. Those of us who grew up with siblings know that sometimes fights are just unavoidable. But as much as we fight with each other, there's still love there. But that's probably easy to say when none of our siblings have ever tried to crash into us with a spaceship. Thanos raised Gomorrah and Nebula as siblings and trained them to be incredible warriors. He also did pretty much everything he could to ensure that at least one of them would end up despising the other. As the perpetual loser of all their fights, Nebula is more than a little bit resentful of Gomorrah. We saw the two of them fight in Guardians of the Galaxy, and things got even more heated in the sequel. Again, Nebula tried to hit Gomorrah with a spaceship. That's quite the sibling scrap. The two siblings waged war with one another, but this time Gomorrah wasn't out to win in a physical way. Really, she just wanted to win her sister over and convince her that becoming friends would be the ultimate rebellion against Thanos. This made it all the more tragic when the Mad Titan threw Gomorrah off a cliff in Infinity War. Everyone knows that being a superhero ain't easy. In addition to the moral aptitude requirement, there's also a lot of training involved. Even if you're a hero whose powers come from a supersuit, that doesn't mean you don't have to put in hours of training. And because we don't have hours and hours to watch our heroes work out, sometimes we just get a training montage like we did in the AntMan movie. Scott Lang gets a supersuit, but he still has to learn how to properly throw a punch, let alone access all of the crazy features his suit is capable of. Of course, Hank Pym helps him out, but for the combat training, his daughter Hope Van Dyne steps up. Scott assures her that due to his 3 years in prison, he knows how to fight. And Hope replies by calmly punching him in the face. It's no secret Hope isn't happy about being left on the sidelines while Scott suits up, and she works out this frustration by absolutely walloping the guy. Hope makes it clear that super insect-themed suit or not, she still knows how to handle herself in a fight. Apparently, just having a super suit with wings wasn't enough for her to gloat about. What happened to Natasha Romanoff and Clint Barton in Budapest? We might never know unless it's covered in the Black Widow prequel because of what happened to her in Avengers Endgame. Although they don't get the same love as Steve Rogers and Bucky Barnes, Natasha and Clint have been close for quite some time. Natasha was the only one who knew about Clint's secret family, and these two have been through a lot together. So of course it was an intensely emotional scene when they started battling against each other, both heroes going all out. The stakes were incredibly high, but in a way, winning this fight was really like losing any other fight. The two heroes clashed atop the cliffs of Vormir over who would be taking home the Soul Stone. The winner would get to return to the present-day MCU Earth, and the loser would end up at the bottom of the cliff. Natasha had already sacrificed so much for the chance to save the day, keeping everyone together when the world fell apart after the decimation. So it was especially sad to see her win this fight against one of her oldest and most treasured friends. The Guardians of the Galaxy have always provided a stark contrast to the Avengers. While the Avengers spent most of their MCU career being organized and figuring out how to manage their personality differences to save the day, the Guardians, well, they're a more dysfunctional space-based team of heroes. Although we've seen them grow, change, and develop relationships with one another over the years, it's not surprising their friendship started off with fighting. Star-Lord had just obtained the Orb, which we'd later learn contained the Power Stone. After trying unsuccessfully to sell it, he gets it stolen from him by Gomorrah, who promptly delivers a kick and runs off. But the fight is just getting started because all of the players haven't even arrived yet. Groot and Rocket show up and immediately join in on the action as these heroes proceed to beat each other up for the orb. Gomorrah is supposed to be a terrifying trained assassin, yet she resorts to biting Rocket and then chops poor Groot's arms right off. It's probably for the best that the members of the Nova Corps showed up when they did, or our heroes might not have survived this fight because none of them were anywhere close to giving up. It's It's no secret that Tony Stark loved making super suits. Even though he smashed up his collection at the end of Iron Man 3, that didn't really seem to slow him down very much. He even created a suit of armor meant to stand up against the Incredible Hulk, and that's no easy task. Making a suit of armor designed to destroy one of your friends is a bold move, and could make things a touch awkward, but thankfully Bruce Banner was on board because he's all too aware of how powerful and unstoppable the Hulk can be. And what's the point of having a massive suit of Hulkbuster armor if you're never gonna use it? Luckily, we got to see the armor being put to good use in Age of Ultron. Of course, Tony Stark tried to calm down the Incredible Hulk using his words, but you can just imagine how well that went over. Sorry, Tony, only Natasha Romanoff can pull off that trick. Fortunately, the armor works a lot better. Hulk does manage to cause a staggering amount of property damage, but Tony survives, and the Hulk transforms back into the much more mild-mannered Bruce Banner. Considering recent events in the MCU, this famous fight is even better with a little bit of history behind it. In the movie Ant-Man, Scott Lang is sent on a dangerous task of breaking into an Avengers facility. It's not an easy mission, and despite his best efforts, he doesn't make it out undetected. Sam Wilson is on patrol and discovers him before he can escape back to Hank Pym. Despite being warned not to, Scott starts fighting with Falcon. Now, Falcon has had way more training, but it's safe to say that Scott has the element of surprise on his side. He probably wasn't expecting to fight an enemy who keeps shrinking down to the size of an ant. Scott ended up getting away, and Falcon asked him not to tell anyone about their scuffle. But the funny thing is that in Civil War, it was established that Scott is a huge fan of Captain America. We don't blame him, but it's pretty funny to watch one hero fawn over the other. Well, after Avengers Endgame, Sam Wilson is the new Captain America. We wonder how Scott Lang is going to feel knowing he once bested Captain America in a fight. Poor Bucky Barnes. His life has been far from easy. Sure, he was a ruthless assassin for years and years, but hasn't his debt to society been paid off? We've seen him go up against his best friend Steve Rogers, Tony Stark, and Natasha Romanoff, but let's not forget about the time he went head-to-toe with the Black Panther. In Captain America Civil War, Bucky gets blamed for an attack which ended the life of T'Challa's father, T'Chaka. T'Challa is heartbroken, but not heartbroken enough to want swift and vicious revenge. When he was in the army, Bucky was known for being a phenomenal soldier, and he's had no shortage of training since then. He doesn't even need a super suit since he has his super strong bionic arm. But there's also the fact that Bucky doesn't really want to fight against T'Challa, or anyone else for that matter. He even leads T'Challa on a crazy chase through traffic as the two of them race through a tunnel. Remember kids, definitely don't try this one at home. Eventually, T'Challa gets the news that Bucky is innocent of this particular crime, while Tony Stark isn't quite so lucky. Bucky Barnes really does just have the worst luck, doesn't he? Earlier, we mentioned that the Guardians of the Galaxy didn't exactly start out as the best of friends when they first met. Well, the Avengers had some troubles of their own when they first got acquainted with one another. Thor found his brother Loki and tried to convince him to surrender peacefully. He was intent on bringing his brother home to face justice in Asgard, but Tony Stark had other ideas. Naturally, Iron Man isn't just going to let some guy fly out of the sky and make off with his prisoner, so they get into a fight over Loki. Tony makes fun of Thor's cape, and Thor lets him know that he's less than impressed by his metal suit. The two went from trading verbal jabs to trading punches in short order. It wasn't exactly a very heroic battle, but it definitely caused less collateral damage than some of the other brawls. Thankfully, Captain America showed up to act as the voice of reason. Well, after Thor tried to hit him with a Mjolnir and it ricocheted off his shield. These heroes were eventually able to work it out and realize that nobody should really be fighting over Loki. The three heroes promised to work together in order to bring him to justice. We all talk about Captain America Civil War and the many epic fight scenes it had between characters who would otherwise be friends, or at least allies. But let's not forget that Black Panther also had a great battle scene featuring people who should have been on the same side. Not only did Eric Killmonger take over Wakanda by winning, or at least seeming to win a fight against T'Challa, but he swayed many minds by using just his words. This puts characters like Okoye in an awkward position. As a member of the Dora Milaje, she was sworn to protect the ruler of Wakanda, which just so happened to be Killmonger at that point, but she just couldn't act against her friend T'Challa. However, her partner W'Kabi supported Killmonger, and this put them at odds. During the massive conflict, we saw M'Baku helping T'Challa despite trying to take him down earlier in the movie. When W'Kabi barreled towards him on a rhino, Okoye stepped between them. These two might not have engaged with their weapons, but their fight was pretty intense. W'Kabi asked Okoye if she'd actually kill him, and she told him she would with no hesitation. Ouch! W'Kabi stood down because, as they say, happy wife, happy life. We don't think Scarlet Witch gets enough credit for being one of the strongest characters in the MCU. She also knows that fighting isn't all about punching and kicking, and there are many ways to inflict damage on an opponent. In Avengers Age of Ultron, Wanda Maximoff isn't a fan of the Avengers to say the least. She blames Tony Stark for the death of her parents, and she and her brother are out for revenge. As part of their battle against the Avengers, Scarlet Witch takes the time out to craft everyone a terrifying nightmare to haunt their dreams. She's like a much better-looking Freddy Krueger. Tony Stark receives a vision that hits on all of his greatest fears: an alien invasion, feeling powerless, and being unable to save those he cares about. It's a vision that seems especially prophetic since Avengers Infinity War and Endgame were released. Thor gets a vision of himself being struck by lightning and obliterating everything around him. This too played out in a way during Thor Ragnarok. A good fight plus hints of things to come in the MCU? It's no wonder Scarlet Witch taking on the Avengers is so great. Wow! Did you have any idea that our beloved heroes have come to blows with each other so many times? Let us know which one of these less-than-friendly fights was your favorite in the comments section below. And then click on that subscribe button for more great videos from us here at CBR. Bye for now.